You're listening to CreepGeeks Podcast. Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/cheapgeek. So it begins again. Welcome back to the CreepGeeks Podcast. This is episode number 185.
Pentagon UFO Vehicles, is Bob Lazar right? And do you believe now?
Yeah. So here we are again. I'm Greg.
I'm Omi.
And this is the CreepGeeks Podcast, where we talk about paranormal and weird news, amongst other things. So, we have a lot of stuff to talk about this time in the podcast, as we do most every other time. What we do is we find stuff to be found to be interesting on the internet, and we put it on here for you guys to listen to, and maybe peruse and think about. And one of the things we've been talking about in our podcast episodes in the past has been the whole government disclosure thing about UFOs.
Yeah.
Everything from Blink-182's frontman Tom DeLonge and the AA tip and all that kind of stuff. Well, it seems that here recently there's been a little bit of a breakthrough.
Okay.
A groundbreaking episode, right, has occurred in the news, and it's like, what? And everybody's talking about it.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to talk about it, and we have a little bit of a different perspective with it.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of what we do. It's kind of looking back at this sort of thing we've been following for quite a while. We like UFOs. We do paranormal, weird news. We kind of do all sorts of stuff in between, but we like to talk about UFOs and cryptids and that sort of thing. But when it comes to what we really enjoy, UFOs is right up at the top.
Yeah.
So we've been following this information for quite a while, and we've been kind of taking a little bit of a look at it. And like I said, we have a different opinion on what we think it really means.
And we've been reserved about this since last year, but I don't know. At this point, I'm kind of, I got a mouthful to say.
Yeah.
So. And
one of the things we like to do with the podcast is we like to go through and talk about this stuff, like we said, but we also like to kind of start our podcast off with an interesting and random factoid type thing. And we've been talking about COVID-19 because it's been kind of interesting and random as some of the things that people search for, because we all know that this thing is this pandemic, whatever you want to call it, has been affecting everybody.
Yeah.
So what we found is that we like to search trends that people look for, to figure out what people are really doing. Because when you're at the privacy of your own computer, what you search for is pretty much just kind of whatever you want. Like, what are you really looking for?
Yeah.
You know, you can watch TV and find out what everybody's looking at, but nothing I think puts a more shinier spotlight on the thing than what people looks for.
Yeah. And Google pulls what you guys are searching for.
Yeah.
So I guess, well, do you want to start off with the top ones or what?
Yeah, because I only want to talk about the top ones. I don't really care about the lesser-known search sites, the search engine-type queries like, is pink eye a sign of coronavirus? Is sneezing a sign of coronavirus?
Well, I do like, is it safe to order pizza during coronavirus?
Yes, because if it's not, there's a whole lot of people that are not safe, because that's all you've been doing, right?
Yeah.
You've been locked in, locked down, and you know, all these pizza places seem to be jumping on the bandwagon of like, hey, just pull up and we'll just throw it in the back of your car so you can ride home with that pizza sliding around all in the back seat. You know, because they show like an SUV pulling up, and the SUV pulls up and they just open the door and it pops open, because everybody has expensive SUVs where you can just push this little button and the back thing opens up.
That doesn't.
And they toss this little simple box in the back, but there's nothing else in the back of the SUV but the pizza box. And they drive away. So, you know, by the time you get home, the cheese is all on one side and things have been ruined, you know. And if you have, like, family out there that when you open the pizza box, they really want to see it in this pristine pizza-like condition, not all over to one side of the box or stuck to the lid, they're not going to be happy.
Yeah.
So, we don't have it. I mean, what did we would pull up and they would just open up the door to the side of the van and just throw it in there, and then went, you know. Can you imagine taking off? That thing would slide to the very back. We're talking about like 158 inches of wheels. I mean, it would just go to the very back.
Yeah.
And I'm lazy, so I hit the brakes, try to make it slide up a little bit. So, I don't know. But some of the things we found to be interesting is that one of the search terms I thought was pretty cool is up 1,350% is COVID rent relief program.
Yeah. And, you know, I actually tried to look that up on my own. it seems to be only a program that's available in select states.
Yeah.
So it kind of dashes the hopes and concerns some people have who are having a hard time making rent right now.
Yeah, because, a lot of places you weren't allowed to work.
Yeah.
And so you went home to be quarantined only to find out you didn't have employment.
Yeah. And now
and there's a lot of companies out there that have been basically utilizing that period to, realign their companies and stuff and fire people. So, I don't know. I'm about done with this whole pandemic thing. It just needs to get done with it. It's just an aggravation.
Unfortunately, it doesn't look like it's going to end anytime soon.
Nope, because one of the other search terms is states requiring requiring quarantine from others.
Yeah.
Up 750%.
Because people are getting tired. They want to go someplace. There's
all this news and stuff out there. It's like, Florida. Everybody's out partying in Florida, and look what they did. They brought the coronavirus back in this, and it's like, wait, there's Texas, and all these states are having this coronavirus upsurge, and it's just become a little bit of a thing. So we're probably going to retire the whole coronavirus search terms thing for the next podcast, because it just seems like, as much as we've looked into this and we talk about it every week, it doesn't really seem like it's getting too much better.
No, it's not. And it's like, me.
Yeah, because so you got people that are trying to do the right thing, wearing a mask and all that sort of thing, and keeping out. Social
distancing.
Right.
Yep.
And then you have people that just don't care, and they're out doing their thing, and at the end of the day, it doesn't seem to have an impact either way. You know what I mean? It's weird, because you watch the news says everybody's dying from coronavirus, but then when you really look into it, it doesn't appear that that's the case. I don't know. I don't know what to think, because we can't seem to figure out what's happening with this thing one way or the other. So the only thing left to do is to be cautious. And being cautious means wearing a mask and stuff like that.
And social distance and avoiding things. And if you don't feel well, don't go out.
Yeah.
In our rural area, because I do trust our local news, we've got an uptick. And it's because we're so rural, So.
Well, is it? Or is it because the results are coming in? Now, there's all this conspiracy out there when it comes to this sort of thing. Is this a real thing and not a real thing? Can you trust the results? Can you trust the test and all that? At the end of the day, what do you do? The only thing you can do is be safe, right? Yeah. Wear a mask, because it seems like that's the thing. Everybody's saying wear a mask, so I'm going to jump on that bandwagon and wear a mask.
Okay.
And honestly, if you think about it, the way people are in general, we're all a bunch of filthy animals, and there's a lot of people out there that are a lot more filthy than us. We should just be wearing masks all the time. You know what I mean? I don't know. So we kind of looked into that sort of thing, and we realized that the coronavirus search terms, it's cool and all, but it seems like these results, the search results are kind of not really going anywhere fun to talk about.
No.
Not anymore.
It's kind of getting sad.
Yeah, because it's like this thing is just kind of dragging along. So then when we look at our interesting random FDA recalls, which I thought was pretty interesting when we first started talking about that, it's like, ooh, there's all this stuff that I didn't know was being recalled, because let's be honest, you don't normally pay attention to recalls until they hit the news.
Yeah.
So I was shocked when I found that Core Organics watermelon CBD oil tincture contains lead, and it's been recalled.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. And then, you want to hear something else that was shocking? There's been a whole bunch of hand sanitizers. Hand sanitizers have been recalled because they have, undeclared methanol, and some of these things are kind of poisonous.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Look at this. 3 undeclared methanols. One has a subpotency of ethyl alcohol. I mean, these things are dangerous, man. It's like, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
And then this is the weird thing. Iron Drops liquid dietary supplement, Iron Drops sample liquid dietary supplement, has undeclared milk in it. Why does an Iron Drop have undeclared milk?
Oh, my goodness. And it's in the same thing for the Upspring Baby Iron and Immunity dietary
yeah. Undeclared milk. And then it's like, so what we have here recently from the last time we chatted, and for those of you who are tuning in, as you always do, we're really glad to see you. And if it's your first time here, we're glad to have you here. But, I mean, you look, it's like, out of the top 7 or 8 things we're looking at, well over half of them are hand sanitizers.
Oh, no. We missed this one. Hostess.
What?
Raspberry Zingers.
Those bastards.
Potential to contain mold.
Oh, that's not good. How would you know?
I don't know.
If it was a Twinkie, you'd never know because things last forever.
Yeah, but this is the
I thought you were going to go, oh no, the Chantilly Key Lime Tartlets.
No.
From Whole Foods has undeclared almonds in it, or almonds, or however you want to say it.
As much as they charge, I expect extra almonds.
Yeah. Like, yes,
but no,
please.
like everybody occasionally, at least once a year, you'll see those zingers on the shelf. And I don't care if it's the chocolate ones or the raspberry ones, you'll buy a pack. Maybe once a year.
Not raspberry.
I do. They're pretty good.
No.
Yeah.
Guess what? No.
Well, now no.
Nope.
So
it's got undeclared almonds in it.
No. Well, I'm counting.
Or whatever it was.
I'm counting how many hemp oil tinctures and how many hand sanitizers have recalls now.
I know. It's like, well, it's only the watermelon. Watermelon CBD oil tincture has lead in it, and hand sanitizer has methanol and ethyl alcohol.
Well, we missed one when we were on break. There's another one. So there's 2 different hemp oils with excess lead in product.
Where is that coming from?
It's on page 3, page 2 or 3.
No. I mean, where is the lead coming from? That's what I'm wondering.
Yeah.
Like, where are they getting the lead from? I thought this stuff was made in glass beakers where they were straining weed through coffee filters or something.
It's usually a really clean process. I watched it.
Evidently not. It's got lead in it. We're going to move on to the next thing. So, it's kind of one of those things where we thought the interesting random FDA recalls was pretty funny because some of the stuff is kind of, it's like, what?
Yeah.
Because you only ever hear about, like, dog food and, like, when you buy, like, salad stuff, there's, like...
Or frozen vegetables.
Yeah, some kind of, like, listeria or something like that, But they didn't do a recall for people licking ice cream. Which is kind of gross. Remember that? When that was all of our problems, we had to worry about just random strangers licking ice cream?
Yeah.
Yeah. Nope. Okay, so while we were taking a little bit of a break, because we got to do that every once in a while, because this technically starts off our Season 5, Episode 185 of the CreepGeeks Podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah. And went through, and we were going to be making some format changes, and one of the things that we're going to do is basically we're going to pick some news. We're going to talk about one particular subject for a little while, and that's going to be the end of it. We're not going to talk in great and agonizing detail about 5 or 6 different individual topics.
Okay.
Because that's just a lot, I think. I think it's just a little much.
Yeah.
And every once in a while you run across something that you really want to spend more time on. You wind up spending like 20, 30 minutes talking about a particular subject or whatever, and then you never or don't have the inclination to get to the other stuff that you put in the title of your podcast.
Yeah. Oops.
Yeah, well, I've done that quite a bit. So, well, one of the things we've been seeing, and we've been doing a podcast for a while, and we happen to like UFOs. Like, that's kind of at the top of what we enjoy. But we do paranormal and weird news podcasts, but we also investigate. So we do investigations. We also do cryptid investigations and paranormal type stuff. So we talk about it because we think it's interesting. We like to take a lighthearted approach to that sort of thing, and we also go out and investigate.
Yeah.
And we go to these weird, wacky places and do stuff like that. Well, ever since this particular year being a little bit different with the whole pandemic thing, we haven't really gone that many places, plus kind of broke my neck.
Yeah.
So, we've been kind of, kicked in the shins for the first half of this year, and here we are about halfway through it, and it looks like much is not going to change. Because, you can pick the places you want to go and pick the things you want to do, but if that place is in quarantine or lockdown, there's a, chance you either A, may not be able to do it, or B, you might get there and get quarantined. You never really know what's going on. Plus, we have these pesky things called protests that are out there. So it's kind of like we've been sort of playing it safe, keeping an idea of what we want to do and what we are looking at, and also planning some things to happen later on towards the end of the year.
Yeah. Which
are still in place. One of the things that we did do while we were gone is we actually went and did the Smoky Mountain Bigfoot Convention conference. What is it?
Smoky Mountain Bigfoot Conference 2020. Yeah.
And we're going to talk about that in our next podcast because there's some interesting things that happen there. But primarily we're talking about it with, anyway, we have some stuff to talk about. But this came out while we were doing all this other stuff.
Yeah.
So, with AA-TIP and Blink-182, Tom DeLonge, supporting bringing out this information, last year, almost 2018, 2017, whenever it was, about, look at the U.S. Navy release this footage, and did they really release it or not? And, oh my gosh, it's disclosure from the government because they're talking about unidentified aerial phenomenon. And everybody was like, the government's admitting there's UFOs. And we were saying, no, that's not what they're saying at all. They just basically put a way in place to request information about unexplained aerial phenomenon and instances thereof, and also to give military personnel a correct way to document something that they have seen, because there really wasn't any way to do that officially before. And that's all they were saying.
Yeah.
And then everybody was like, no, this is this. And then this will turn into much ado about nothing. Really. I mean, what really happened from all that stuff?
Really not much.
Nothing. And then Blink-182 and Tom DeLonge and the Through the Star, or To the, I keep going to say Through the Stars, To the Stars Academy. We're talking about how they were going to release all this stuff and there's going to be disclosures going to happen. And they're working with the government and doing all this stuff. And look, we bought some like space age, space alien metal, possibly from Roswell crash, from an undisclosed person, Linda Moulton Howe,
Yeah.
for like $70,000, and it's going to be sent off, and we're going to examine it. And that's when the military partnership got in there. Like, yeah, let's be partners, and let's see what's going on. And then what did you hear about that? Nothing. Right? It was like no good will come of this, or just basically nothing's going on. And I think with those results, they found them to be man-made.
Huh.
Because I haven't really heard too much about it. And as much as I love the UFO stuff, I don't want to run down that rabbit hole because we got stuff to do.
True.
Because you can spend forever trying to figure all this stuff out. So here recently, there's been this big news release from the New York Times talking about UFO and the government, right? Kicking it out there. And they ran these articles. Like one of them was titled, No Longer in the Shadows. Pentagon's UFO unit will make some findings public. Yeah. Pentagon to make UFO discoveries public. This is what we've been waiting for. Right?
Yeah.
So there's been these articles. So I'm like, let's check this out. And it was kind of a big deal. Made a big blip. And I'm like, we need to talk about this. So, with this big announcement coming from the New York Times, which is a pretty big newspaper, right? It's a pretty reputable news source. And I do that with quotes, reputable. They put some information out there. Supposed to basically shine a newer, brighter, shinier light on this whole thing about government disclosure and, of course, the AA tip things and the sightings and everything that was sort of kicked about and talked about in 2017, 2018, right?
Yeah. But for me, the only thing I learned so far in this article is that the AA tip was renamed. I mean, it was renamed to... What was it?
Well, we're going to talk about that.
Yeah.
But primarily what you learned is kind of nothing.
Yeah.
So let's talk about what it says in the article. No longer in shadows, Pentagon's UFO unit will make some findings public. And then it says, for over a decade, the program, now tucked inside the Office of Naval Intelligence, has discussed mystery events and classified briefings.
Okay.
All right. Kind of makes sense because it was military U.S. Navy footage from fighter jets that was released where people were like, look at that Tic Tac UFO whizzing around there, and you had Fast Mover and all this other crazy stuff. And right. So, hoping it's refreshing your memory. If you don't follow UFO stuff, you probably have no idea what I'm talking about. But there was some footage that came out, and it sort of got released that it was real government footage from a real set of government aircraft that was put out to the public and released without the government's approval. Showing unidentified aerial phenomenon, which is a nice way of saying UFOs without making it sort of alien related. That there were some craft flying around and they were shocked. The shocking part is that the military owned up to it and said, yes, that's actual legit footage. So at that point, people were like, oh my God, the government has just said that UFOs exist. And that's not what they said at all. They said, yes, this is authentic footage. It was real.
Yeah.
Right. So when we get back to this article, it says, despite Pentagon statements that it disbanded a once covert program to investigate unidentified flying objects, the effort remains underway. Now, they're talking about when, through Harry Reid and some other stuff, Senator Harry Reid, they found out that there was an actual an agency in the government there to investigate unexplained aerial phenomenon reports.
Okay.
And people were freaking out. They're like, oh my gosh, the government's investigating UFOs. They had a budget of $20 million.
Okay.
That's nothing. And this was over a course of like 10 years.
Yeah.
That's nothing for a government budget. So that just tells me that they probably had really no effort put into this thing whatsoever.
And plus the phrasing. The phrasing is that they were going to investigate the reports, not the phenomenon itself.
Exactly.
So therein is one of my many pet peeves is no, they're not investigating the UFOs. They're investigating the reports. So it's not just, what happened. It's the persons who reported for me.
Yeah. And the amount of money is so little. If you think $20 million is a huge thing, that's nothing for the government.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes filling up like a destroyer in the United States Navy can cost $1 million. If you got something that has a couple 100,000 gallon capacity and it's like $5 a gallon or whatever, look where you're at, right? I mean, you never know.
Yeah.
So what they did was, after all this stuff came out, and the ability to report these things officially now, and do freedom of information request, and basically be able to request, information about these sightings, became popular, and you had some senators jumping in there wanting to be able to, get information. They've sort of taken this one step further. So the program that they had in place has been renamed.
Yep.
Now it's called the Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon Task Force. And their job is to standardize collection and reporting on sightings of unexplained aerial vehicles.
Oh, gosh.
So they're going to continue investigating the reports. It's just that now, since they're a real deal, right, official, they're going to get more money.
Yeah.
So hopefully these mystifying encounters between military pilots and unidentified aerial vehicles will get some, maybe some real information out of it, right? This whole thing, again, is not any kind of like the government admitting that there's aliens or even that there's UFOs.
And I mean, this seems kind of silly, but the way I read some of these sentences, it's like, to standardize collection and reporting on sightings of unexplained aerial vehicles. For me, that's like, doesn't MUFON and that other group do that already, almost?
Yeah, but they're not the government. And MUFON has its own problems right now.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah.
Which we could talk about, but we're not going to because, that seems to be the popular thing these days. Just that sort of thing is happening out there. But
yeah.
Okay, so what they said is standardized collection and reporting on those sightings, right? It was to report that at least some of its findings to the public within 180 days after passage of the Intelligence Authorization Act.
Okay.
So there's the idea that, hey, they're going to report their findings out there, whatever they find or see, they're going to release to the public. Again, that's not disclosure. And do you think they're going to really release everything to the public? What if they went out there and they found that some of these unidentified aerial phenomena are actually top secret, ultra high level secret, other country type craft? Do you think they're going to release what they found out to the general public? No. They wouldn't do that if they captured like a Chinese aeroplane that they've never seen before. But what makes this a little bit crazy is you've got some people like Senator Marco Rubio. He's a Florida Republican who's acting as the chairman of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. He says that he's primarily concerned about reports of unidentified aircraft over American military bases and that it's in the government's best interest to find out who's responsible for those sightings. That's a reasoned response because we've kind of gotten to the point, or at least I have, that a lot of what we think we see is really not UFO type stuff. It's military. It's military. It's been military. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's probably still military, using maybe experimental propulsions, because there's been a lot of moving parts happening from the whole ATIP investigation and the news breaking and the To the Stars Academy and all that stuff. It's like, patents have been filed for unusual propulsion techniques and things, by the government, primarily the Navy, which is strange, but there's some things out there. I mean, what if this is China or Russia? Is basically what Rubio is saying. Heck, we need to take a look at it, because he has some concerns that maybe there's been some technological leap that allows them to conduct this sort of activity. Maybe it's us. Who knows? Mm-hmm. So we're looking at this sort of thing, and we're like, okay, so what does this mean? And if you look at the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, which is what we were all talking about before, the AATIP or ATIP, right? They had spent $22 million in their funding after 2012. So we found out about it in 2017. So in 5 years, their budget was $22 million. That's not really a lot. And now with this new budget, it's going to have to happen because they've renamed the program. They're expanding the program to make it more, I guess, streamlined. And they're going to be investigating these reports and releasing some of these results to the public, we assume. It just makes you wonder, is this an okie doke?
See, I'm starting to feel that way because I feel like this is just the creation of a documentation and paperwork organization.
Yeah.
Where it's like, oh, let's just file it away. Oh, let's just file it away. Like I was saying earlier, it's not an investigation of the phenomenon. At least it's not being presented that way to me. Because, yes, I am a very literal person, but when it comes to reading some of these articles, it's a lot of fluff, and then it just leads down to, so what are they actually going to do?
Right.
And reading into it leads to speculation. which leads to these flashy headlines and everybody talking about it right now.
Well, I mean, if you look at, I think it was our last podcast, the podcast before, where they actually talked to Tom DeLonge, and he said even if he found anything, he wouldn't disclose it to the public because he respects the military so much.
And kind of...
Which leads me to this being an okie doke.
Yeah.
Because if you look at Tom DeLonge and his involvement, right, and granted, he's not a scientist with all that sort of thing, but he is a public figure, a spokesperson, and he's got money, and he's been putting into it. And then you look at Luis Elizondo, who is the former military official guy who sits there, and if you look at some of the pictures that he got in his article, he looks like he's in a rock band with his super sweet tattoos, black T-shirt, and, doing all that stuff. Like he's some kind of like CIA official bad guy, like, oh, look at that bad. What have they actually really done? He's been quoted as saying it no longer has to hide in the shadows. It will have a new transparency. Well, what's going to have the transparency?
And see,
if they're only looking at reports, what's the transparency?
And is the creation of this organization and the creation of all this documentation and researching the reports, is that just another shadow? Is that just another layer to just create and distract because now you have to go through a process because there's an actual organization or an actual project? It just feels like another shadow.
Yeah.
So for me, it's not doing anything other than making me more frustrated.
Yeah. Mr. Elizondo is among a small group of former government officials and scientists with security clearances who, without presenting physical proof, say they are convinced that objects of undetermined origin have crashed on Earth. Materials retrieved for study.
Well, everybody knows objects of unknown origin crash to the Earth all the time. Every astronomer knows that. I mean, come on.
Now, here's where it gets a little crazy, right? I'm reading the article, I'm like, what? And here it is for me, and this is what a lot of people jumped on. So Harry Reid, Senator Harry Reid, he's the former Democratic senator from Nevada who pushed for funding for the earlier UFO program, right, when he was majority leader. Yeah. He said he believes that crashes of objects of unknown origin may have occurred and that retrieved materials should be studied. So when you look at this and you hear it coming from him, you're like, whoa. Crashes have occurred and retrieved materials should be studied. So to a lot of people, they're like, that's the smoking gun, man. He's saying, but not actually saying that crash artifacts and things have been retrieved and there's been crashes. Mm-hmm. And I could see where people would think that. And then the article goes on and explains some things, talking about a Mr. Davis instead of Dr. Davis, and it kind of keeps going from there. I'm not going to bore you guys with all that stuff. Very bottom of the article, which was a correction that came out in July, at the end of July 24th, 2020, because this article came out before that, says, and this is from the New York Times, correction. An earlier version of this article inaccurately rendered remarks attributed to Harry Reid, the retired Senate Majority Leader, right, from Nevada. Mr. Reid said he believed that the crashes of objects of unknown origin may have occurred and that retrieved material should be studied. The correction is that he did not say that crashes had occurred and that retrieved materials had been studied secretly for decades. An earlier version also misstated the frequency with which the Director of National Intelligence is supposed to report on the unidentified aerial phenomenon. It is 180 days after enactment of the Intelligent Authorization Act, not every 6 months.
Oh.
So here's the okie doke. The New York Times, do you think that they just put this article out there without fact-checking what Harry Reid said? Of course they did. They put it out there and basically said that Harry Reid said, we have basically crashes have occurred, we have material, and that these people are going to have to release new information every time they run across one of these things within 180 days after receiving whatever, and let the people know. Yeah. It's not at all what they're saying. So what's happening here in this particular article is nothing at all, other than they've renamed the program, which means that since they have renamed the program, streamlined the ability to file information and request information, that this program is going to need more money. Mm-hmm. So now they're going to be able to ask for a budget because $22 million over like 8 years is nothing.
Yeah. And now there's another layer that researchers are going to have to go through. Potentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that people that are on the outside of the fringe who don't really care so much read this and goes, yep, UFOs have been here. We knew it. So the masses are like, yep, UFOs are real, because they don't really care. They're not going to pay attention to this stuff. It's just going to become a thing for everybody to believe. And if you believe in that kind of thing, if there ever is disclosure and there ever is UFOs and little green men, grays, aliens, Nordic, Icelandics, all that stuff, right? People from the Pleiades and all that jazz. No big deal. But
see, that goes to the next article that we're going to talk about, which is, and I've said this many times in previous episodes, and I'm going to reiterate it to summarize this whole article. This article, again, from the New York Times. Do we believe in UFOs? That's the wrong question. Reporting on the Pentagon program that's investigating unidentified flying objects is not about belief. It's about a vigilant search of facts. And yes, I laugh at vigilant because lately what's been going on in the media is not vigilant. It seems to be knee-jerk. And again, like I've said before, I do not believe in UFOs. However, I do think there is definitely a possibility of extraterrestrial life. I also think that there are unexplained aerial phenomenon in our skies. I want someone to prove that. If I can help research and aid in that process, great. But at the end of the day, I do not have a blind belief, which has too many connotations of I hate to say it, like religious or spiritual or emotional. It's a pursuit of truth, and that's what I feel when I want to explore the UFO phenomenon. And all of us misspeak. We all misspeak. Yeah, I believe aliens are real. And we have to change the phrasing, and it's hard. Even we're going to slip up. But again, it's that pursuit of truth, not belief, because a lot of time belief means with or without context, you accept. And that's got to be that we need to be accountable for that.
Sounds great. Well, here's the deal. Yeah. There's so many moving parts with all of this stuff. I mean, even if you sit there and you look at this and you're like, wow, okay, I don't think they've really said or done anything other than continue on trying to drum up people to read the article and make a big deal out of nothing, because they've done this 3-4 articles deep so far, right?
Yeah.
Well, when you look at it, I mean, most of this stuff was buried deep. You couldn't even hardly get to. It wasn't front page news by any means. There's other stuff that's going on out there, like people who are saying, hey, look, we've seen more large objects outside, of the sun doing weird stuff than we ever have. How come nobody's talking about that?
Yeah.
More things flying behind the moon that are ginormous. Nobody's saying anything about that. That there's so much other things or so many other things going on. Why is this even a thing? And that's what it's like. Is this a diversionary tactic to turn our eyes away from things that are really happening, or is it just really not? Or is this all much ado about nothing at all?
Yeah.
Trying to hide ultra secret, black box, black ops, military, whatever, like the top clandestine military things out there that we shouldn't know about being a regular person.
And see, part of that is, yes, the clandestine, the secret, the unknown, the currently unexplained. And you just have to accept it, which goes with that belief connotation. And this particular article actually quotes an anthropologist about that whole belief thing. And its belief has to do with matters of faith. It has nothing to do with the kind of knowledge that is based on scientific inquiry. Do people believe in the sun or the moon or the changing seasons or the chairs they're sitting on? When we want to understand something strange, something previously unknown to anyone, we have to begin with an entirely different set of questions. What is it? How does it work?
So, yeah, but nobody cares about that. Nobody cares about that. Because look at the generation we're sitting in. Look at how we are as a people these days. Nobody gives a crap about all that stuff. They just want the answer. They don't want to look it up for themselves. They don't want to do any of the research.
Yeah. And
I mean, we have an entire industry where people call in to find the answer without actually having to look it up for themselves. I mean, if you've ever done tech support of any kind at all that sold a product, that the answer is usually 9 times, or I won't say 9 times out of 10, 8 out of 10 times it's in the manual that goes with the product that people bought. Right?
Okay.
They don't care. They don't even want to look it up. I just want to know what the deal is. Because in my heart, I would like to think that it's like we have these ultra super advanced military craft whizzing around out there, because that just makes us way smarter than what we actually really are right now.
Yeah.
I mean, because at the end of the day, we can't even wear a mask or control a pandemic, right? We can't do any of that stuff. But, I mean, I would like the idea that we can get on a spacecraft and fly out in the middle of nowhere, or maybe go to the other side of the galaxy and stuff.
Okay.
Because that just makes us appear to be way more smarter, but we're not. I don't think that's probably the case. I think we do have some advanced technology, but I don't think we're that smart. But speaking of smart, Bob Lazar, if you know who Bob Lazar is, I mean, he worked within Area 51. He didn't actually work at Area 51. I believe he worked at S4, but they were just getting too nerdy, right? Where he said he worked on these advanced crafts, and part of his job was to figure out how the propulsion worked and that sort of thing. You know, and it came from otherworldly, non-human created technology. Well, in other words, alien, right?
Yeah.
And people have basically said from the time he's came out and said this sort of thing in the 80s, and I watched it on TV when he said it, and I just thought it was fantastical, right?
Yeah.
That this kind of thing exists, and it does happen, and we have this technology, and people either believe him or they don't believe him, right? Well, here's the thing. When all these articles came out, you know, it was like, hey, is Bob Lazar right? Was he right? Because, you know, when you read the articles, you know, at first glance, you're like, yep, they're saying that they have crashed alien craft or non-human made craft, right?
Yeah.
And that they've been, taking materials, which would probably mean technology as well. So wouldn't that vindicate Bob Lazar, who has been saying for 40 years now that, yes, you know, I worked here. I seen this with my own eyes. I feared for my life. And basically that's all he said.
Yeah.
And people were like, he's a crazy person. Even people, you know, the investigators in the UFO field that have written books about all this sort of thing, and that's how they generate their living, say that Bob Lazar is not, he's not telling the truth.
Okay.
Now, of those, there are some that say he is telling the truth, but primarily leans towards, because his narrative is different than their narrative primarily. And it kind of gets to, you know, was he right? Okay. So if you look at the information that's out there and some of the stuff of what Bob Lazar says, it sounds pretty crazy. But when you read this article here and you're like, okay, well, the crash has happened and material's been taken. So was Bob Lazar actually telling the truth? And if you don't know who Bob Lazar is, there's movies about him.
An autobiography,
all of that stuff is out there. You can totally find it. There's multiple documentaries that were made about Bob Lazar. His Wikipedia page is pretty accurate, I guess, for the most part. And is Bob Lazar right? So that's a question that we're kind of looking at here. And if you take it and you put it in within the realm of, he hasn't made any attempt to make money off of whatever he's put out there about working at Area 51. Technically S4, right?
Yeah.
He hasn't tried to make any money off of this. He said the same thing every time. He hasn't really wavered at all, other than to say what he's seen, what he worked on, and what he did was this, and that the result of him whistleblowing and saying what he's seen and what he worked on is that it ruined his life.
I mean,
he tells you straight up,
yeah.
It ruined my life. If I would have kept my mouth shut, you've never heard of me, I'd probably still be working on this advanced technology. Because he, you know, if anything, he's like a scientist, but he's like ultra smart and he does all this stuff. And, you know, he has his own business now, but he lives under constant scrutiny with all this sort of thing. And he's getting, you know, the questions are there. It wrecked his life. So he really hasn't benefited from this financially at all. And he hasn't tried to make any money off of it, because I'm sure he could have.
I mean, he finally did his autobiography in like 2019. So,
yeah.
I mean, otherwise,
this happened in like 87 or something
89.
Like that.
Yeah.
89.
So
is when he talked about it. I mean, come on.
He's had decades, literally decades, to try to, you know, shill this, I guess. But no, I mean, it's all been, this is how this impacted my life. And it wasn't until that movie came out, and then now he's got his autobiography.
Yeah.
I mean, and that in itself speaks to credibility to me. I mean, especially in this day and age. So I don't know. I don't know if I don't think what is currently in the media speaks to proving Bob Lazar right. I still feel that we need more answers, you know?
Yeah. And, a lot of what we talk about with Bob Lazar and with the article that came out, the one that we talked about where it says no longer in the shadows, Pentagon's UFO unit, right, will make some findings public. In the article, they say there's a buried nugget about how astrophysicist and Pentagon contractor Eric W. Davis gave a classified briefing to government officials in March about retrieved off-world vehicles not made on Earth. And there's some hankiness going on with that, so we weren't really going to talk too much about it because really I think that these articles are just, there's nothing really to them all. It says, but this article talks about Bob Lazar possibly being correct and being vindicated. It says, I know it's nuts. If you've ever watched the X-Files, the U.S. government has basically done a 180 on UFOs. For nearly a century, intel gathering under clandestine programs like Project Mogul, Project Sign, Project Grudge, Project Blue Book, and Project Ozma have one guiding principle: blanket denial. And the stated goal was to investigate UFO sightings, and the outcome was official excuses. UFOs are weather balloons, street lamps, migrating birds, right? Gas, like from like, oh, you got swamp gas, right?
Yeah.
And all these were illusions that were refracted by the natural world, and these were fantasies of deranged imaginations and that they weren't real. And all of that changed. What they're saying is starting in 2017 when the New York Times blockbuster article revealed the existence of the the U.S. government's Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, which was created a decade earlier to analyze unexplained phenomena. When the ATIP started, right? When we started talking about ATIP and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then the article goes on to say, what was once the stuff of supermarket tabloids is now being taken seriously by politicians and scientists. So isn't it time that Bob Lazar got a second hearing in the court of public opinion? And so the man put Area 51 on pop cultural map in 1989 when during an interview with George Knapp from Las Vegas, he's Las Vegas investigative reporter, right?
Yeah.
He made claims, basically that changed the world, right? He said that he worked at the top secret military base, S4, near Papoose Lake, where his job was to reverse engineer crashed alien flying saucers. Mm-hmm. And people were like, it's funny. A lot of people thought, absolutely, he's 100% telling the truth. And other people were like, he's crazy. And he kind of goes back and forth. But here it is, 30 years later. And this article says that nothing Lazar said has been disproven. Which is true.
Yeah.
There's nothing that he's talked about that has been disproven. One of the things that they talked about Bob Lazar being crazy and lying was like, the hand scanner, where he walked up and he put his hand on the scanner and it scanned it and said, "Oh, you're Bob Lazar," and let him in. And people were like, "No, that doesn't exist. And then sooner or later, was like 30 years later, they go to a place that actually has one of those hand scanners, and he was right. So it's like every time you think he's wrong about something, it pops up for him to be correct.
And then trying to discredit him based on his education or previous employment. And that, I had my own theories about that. So
they scrubbed his records.
Yeah.
I mean, if anything, because there's not even a record of him being born.
Oh,
How do you get a driver's license? How do you get into school? How do you do all this stuff if you haven't even been born? How did he get paid?
Yeah.
You got to have a social security number, which means you have to be able to prove your identity. How do you even get paid?
Which didn't George Knapp try to research that? And it was like even only the records pertaining to George Knapp were messed with.
Yeah.
Just, down to everyday basics, like is he registered to vote? How do you get paid? That type of stuff. So I don't know.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know. The theory is that the reason why Bob Lazar is actually still alive in the first place is because he completely caught him off guard. And at the time, the government really didn't have a way or didn't have it in place, a method, if you will, to be able to handle people that were about to disclose information. Like, how do you handle it? And he just kind of slipped through with the whole thing because he caught them with their pants down.
Yeah.
Because he says the reason why he did it was that he thought that he was going to be killed.
Yeah,
he said he was in fear for his life, and instead of, trying to run from or whatever, he embraced it head on and said, well, if you're going to take my life, if I tell everybody and it's not a secret anymore, then there's no reason to kill me. Which is kind of a genius thing, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's like a thing. So he's never once tried to profit from this whistleblowing stuff that happened to ruin his career, and what he says, like it ruined his life. He's not on any lucrative speaking circuits. And I read this in this article. I'm like, you know what? That's something, because you have people that used to be on Bigfoot shows. The show has been gone for 6 years, 7 years, and they're still out there on the circuit.
Yeah.
Making money, $10 a picture. Right? If more. I mean, and you've got other people who've written books from the 60s that are still on these like conventions, and the paranormal convention, UFO convention, cryptid, Bigfoot conventions. There's people that have written books 30, 40 years ago that are still riding that sort of tide with that sort of thing because the interest is still there.
Yeah.
If you said Bob Lazar is going to be speaking in a convention center and tickets are $50, I'm going.
True.
If you have even a remote interest in UFOs at all, you know who Bob Lazar is. It'd be like trying to go see Stanton Friedman. We tried to go see Stanton Friedman 3 different times and never made it.
Yeah.
I mean, we were going to drive 250 miles to go to Dulce to see Stanton Friedman.
Like on a Thursday or a Friday.
Yeah, it was like, I could take one day off of work and we were going to leave like at midnight, drive all the way out there. We were going to see that, and I was going to drive back and go to work the next day.
Yeah.
And we're not even that. We're in it, and we like talking about this stuff. There are people that are super way more diehard than that. He's not selling T-shirts, right, because he could. He's not doing the speaking circuit. He's been on television and in the public media only a handful of times. One of those times was on the Joe Rogan show. Yeah. And that's when a movie was made, and that movie had ties with George Knapp and Bob Lazar, and I think that's probably the only reason why he did it. I think he trusts George Knapp.
Yeah. Well, I trust George Knapp. So.
A lot of people trust George Knapp. So I think that's why he went on that show with Joe Rogan, and if you don't know who Joe Rogan is, he's got one of the top podcasts in the country. He just signed a $100 million deal to move his podcast to another place. I can't remember where it is. I don't know if it's might be Spotify, actually. I think it is Spotify. And Joe Rogan, he's an MMA person. He was on TV. He's a stand-up comedian. He's got a pretty interesting show. Whether you like Joe Rogan or not, doesn't matter. He's been on there a couple different times. And one of the things that he put out after the New York Times article that recently just came out was that, he sent a tweet out about, hey, this Bob Lazar was telling the truth all along. So
it was with Spotify. It was for $100 million.
That's what I said. $100 million for a podcast. You're listening to this podcast right now, the CreepGeeks Podcast, for free. Think about that for a second, right?
Yeah.
So when Joe Rogan tweets out there, evidence suggests that UFO whistleblower Bob Lazar was telling the truth the entire time. I mean, that's something. You know? That thing got retweeted like 7,000 times and 33,000 likes. And, I don't know, man, because that whole Area 51 and him Bob Lazar telling what he's seen and what he was there to do and all that opened up the door for everything. And I think that's actually what made X-Files a super popular show, because it became mainstream. And when all this stuff really sort of became mainstream, that's when the interest became to where it was okay.
And see, that kind of goes back to that whole acceptance versus still pursuing the truth.
Yep.
And like I wanted to point out on this Bob Lazar article, there's a couple of places where it's kind of like half-handed disparaging.
Yeah.
Like, oh, he's crazy. They said some stuff about drugs and awful things. And then the thing that gets me as somebody who wants to be a writer or get better at being a writer, the bottom of the article, this article was done by a pop culture columnist.
Yep.
So not an investigative journalist.
No, that's why I put him in there.
Yeah. So that just kind of a little bit of a backhand there for me,
Well, that's why one of the other articles that I included was one that came off of Richard Dolan's website. And Richard Dolan is a ufologist, and he's been in front of Senate or Congress or whatever, because when they went and they talked in front of like the world nations, I don't remember exactly what. It was a big deal, and honestly, I didn't really care as much to watch all that sort of thing. Because, I was kind of working and doing stuff, but, so I like Richard Dolan. I think he's legit as he can get. And I like Stanton Friedman. because I think he was as legit as he could get originally. I think towards the end, maybe people like him, they don't like him, doesn't matter. But I think he's pretty authentic in what he cares about and what he talks about. And, his article, this is what we've been waiting for, the question mark, kind of talks about it. And it's like, this is really, if this is the sum total and there is nothing more, then this is a disappointing article to say the least.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Somebody said it. So
yeah. Well, this is what I was alluding to, and I didn't want to give it away because otherwise what's the point of talking on a podcast for an hour? This is much ado about nothing.
Yeah.
There has been no real disclosure. There has been no admission of crashed craft from other worlds or materials from other worlds. None of that. There hasn't been any admission. There's been no real disclosure whatsoever, other than the fact that the government is researching.
And much to Mr. Dolan's credit, in true Dolan style, he picks apart these articles and these recent news pieces with, his statements. He'll take the article segment that talks about Mr. Davis and he'll analyze it and he'll go back and say, no, this is this and this,
Yeah.
So if you want that super in-depth, counterpoint, he's done it. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, there's a few other tidbits they talked about here and there that are interesting, but overall the piece is shockingly lightweight. And it would be interesting to learn why this turned out to be so.
Yeah.
Well, the simple answer is that it got a lot of traction when it came out before, and then there's an article, then another follow-up article, and they were basically doing what they want to do, and that's to get readers.
Yeah.
So, what I thought was pretty funny was some of the comments that were put on Mr. Dolan's page. And one of them was, the more you expect, the deeper your disappointment. Right? Mm-hmm. Underwhelming, to say the least. This person's slightly more optimistic. Excuse me. Says, we'll have to take the win here. But maybe they balked on publishing something more substantive or substantive.
Yeah.
How do you say it?
Substantive.
Which time will tell. But this was not putting any paste back in the tube, I suppose. And I don't know what that means. I guess saying you can't get toothpaste back in the tube. I don't know.
A cat's out of the bag, albeit a lame cat. So, yeah.
I repeat here, one of my observations of many UFO disclosures. They look like nutcases or eccentrics. The key person involved, Luizondo, is shown in a large color picture. He looks like a nutcase. Corpulent, tattooed, poorly dressed, hardly credible. And I'm like, okay, so this guy is, excuse me, obviously a little bit older, but, and then there's another article in here, or another comment where basically it's like, it's 2020, man. You can't judge a person from wearing a black T-shirt, having tattoos, and not looking like your standard suit and tie kind of guy.
Yeah, I saw that one. I was like, you go, girl.
Which is true. Having tattoos and wearing jeans does not mean you're a nutcase in today's world. Look at the average person in public today.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then here's my favorite. Needs some Viagra. This article is a bit limp.
True. And I think that was his overall point. There were opportunities in the article for genuine analysis that just never happened. No recognition of implications. And in general, it's just disappointing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is the same feelings we had when they talked about this back in 2017 when it came out and everybody was screaming disclosure happening. The government says admitted that there's UFOs and also I'm like, no, that's not at all what's going on here. I didn't feel it.
Yep.
I don't feel it with this. So and I'm telling you, it's kind of one of those things where it's like, why is the government letting all this happen?
We'd have to put our tinfoil hats on for that, but
I think that they're just letting people go with it, and it's becoming a thing, and they're taking the heat away from it because I think that most everything we see these days up in the skies is actual government technology.
Or is it?
And I think part of that is that it may not all 100% be our technology.
Yeah.
I mean, here recently, the Russians, possibly the Chinese, have got like a satellite killer up in space, and it's been up there doing some stuff. That's a news article that's out. Okay. It's in the news. It's a real thing. Have you heard about that at all?
No.
Yeah.
But
That's kind of strange. How a satellite killer that's basically made the news somehow or another is up there moving around doing some stuff. It's been reported. It's out in the public, and nobody heard about that at all.
yeah, but I think another big question is there's a lot the general public hasn't heard
Right.
about.
Well,
lately.
I mean, part of the reason why I bring that up is because when the current president created the Space Force and everybody laughed and was like, whoa, 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 and he basically said, we are going to do what we need to do.
Yeah.
And people were like, he's going to militarize space. And the Russians were really angry about it. Right?
Yeah.
And then here they are 2 weeks ago doing the same thing. Doing exactly what they were mad at the U.S. for doing.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the articles that I'm going to give you real quick says, Space Force on alert behind Russia's mysterious testing of deadly anti-satellite weapons in orbit. And so on July 15th, Russia injected a new object into orbit from Cosmos 2543. Right? Russia released this object in proximity to another Russian satellite, which is inconsistent, right? Inconsistent with the system's stated mission as an inspector satellite. So if you've got satellite killer satellites that are up there already, the Russians are mad at the U.S. for creating a space force where the president basically said, we're going to do what we need to do to protect our assets in space. Why are we looking so hard at, ATIP and unidentified aerial phenomenon here on Earth? Maybe we should really be looking to the skies, man.
Yeah.
I don't know. But I can tell you, if the Russians are doing it, there's a high likelihood we already have or have been. And that actually ties into a conversation I had over this weekend. Dun, 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 with somebody.
Okay.
Yeah. Who was in the Air Force and told me some things.
Oh.
Yeah. I don't know. So who knows? Kind of a weird thing. But here we are. Disclosure, non-disclosure, whatever you look at. No longer in the shadows. Pentagon's UFO unit will make some findings public. What are they going to show us? What are they going to tell us? I don't know. Maybe you can read between the lines for whatever's put out there. But so far we're looking at much ado about nothing with this whole UFO thing. I think until somebody shows up on the doorstep and says, hey, here we are, I don't think we're going to find anything from our own government. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Who knows? But I would suspect that out of all of this, we're probably going to get more information about Bob Lazar, possibly another couple of documentaries, that sort of thing, or maybe somebody will bring out some real truth. Maybe somebody will bring out some real truth and real evidence to sort of dispute whatever's being said about the lack of evidence. Maybe they'll prove it to the counter, because there's still lots of things going on out there that we don't really understand, and it could be tied to UFOs, aliens, all that sort of thing. Everything from the abductions that happen to the implanted materials that seem to show up sometimes in people's bodies, so all of that sort of thing, right? And maybe at the end of the day, it's all related. I don't know. Have no idea. I mean, even Skinwalker Ranch is not really a thing anymore. You know what I mean? That place was like a place that was really hard to get into, had evidence and things and phenomena happening all the time, and it seemed to run the gamut. Everything from UFOs to ghosts to demons to skinwalkers, all that stuff happened there. And then here we are, there's a TV show about it where pretty much kind of really nothing happened the entire time.
Yeah, but I also have my own feelings on that. I think that the boat has been missed on exploring it from a different perspective.
Well, I think since Bob Bigelow ran that show for a long time, whatever was there is not there anymore.
You mean like he maybe thoroughly swept the place?
Maybe he swept it. Maybe he took whatever was there. Maybe whatever was there has been, no longer, maybe it's been sort of neutralized or whatever, nullified to where it's no longer an issue.
Okay.
Because why would he sell it? I think the government gave him money to buy it and research it. And then he sold it. Interesting.
Yeah.
Don't know. But yeah, that's about all I got. So if you've been listening to us ramble a little bit about a series of news articles that really talk about UFO stuff that really didn't talk about UFO stuff and didn't really shine any more light on what was already there, very much appreciated. just trying to say this. Everything we see on TV these days and all these shows that are out there, the paranormal and UFOs and undiscovered and undisclosed, all this crazy stuff that's out there, if you watch them and take them for face value, then the world is this crazy, scary place. And you should believe everything you see, right? No, don't. Be skeptical. Do some research. Look it up yourself. The only thing I would caution is be careful about how skeptical and how much research you want to do, because you will go down a rabbit hole that 30 years later you'll still never have the answer to.
True, but in the same breath, I think eventually we need to do an episode about actually doing the due diligence and doing the research to make yourself more educated.
Sure.
Yeah, because I could go on a whole tangent on just being sent stuff that nobody really looked past what they were looking at on social media.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm all about it. I'm all about doing the research and stuff. But at the end of the day, the stuff that we talk about when we do our podcast is we do a high-level overview of a lot of things, because when you really dig too deep into all this stuff, like I said, it's a wormhole, it's a rabbit hole, it's a place to go down where no matter how much information you dig or no matter how far you get with the entire thing, there will be somebody who's come along who's done it longer than you have and comes up with a completely different hypotheses.
Okay.
I don't know. So, anyway, that's about it for that.
All right.
So, I think at this point, we're going to go ahead and wrap up the podcast, because we've been talking about Pentagon, UFOs, Bob Lazar, right? Some wonderful search terms and stuff like that to look for in Fda Recalls for about an hour now. And I think at this point, we are just about finished with the podcast.
Yep. And, we mentioned earlier that, Bob Lazar came out with an autobiography. In the podcast notes, you can find links to everything we've talked about, but you can also find links to some recommended reading, not just Bob Lazar, but Stanton Freeman, as well as some other interesting books that you might like. I do want to thank our Patreon supporters. That's Dave, Adam, James, Bobby, John, and other John. If you want to be a Patreon supporter, you can visit us at patreon.com/CreepGeeks. And I do want to let you guys know we do have Bigfoot coffee in stock. So there is a link to the Creep Geek store in the show notes. You can click on that and get yourself some tasty Bigfoot bold coffee.
Yes.
Now, if you have comments, questions, want to reach out to us, that's going to be contact@creepgeeks.com, or you can hit us up on Facebook. We are pretty active on social media, so find us Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We're on there.
Yep. Any questions, comments, concerns, let us know. You should stick around for the next podcast episode. We're going to talk about our adventures at the Smoky Mountain Bigfoot Conference and some other things as well.
Ooh.
So, yeah, anyway.
Yeah.
So, yeah. See you later. Take it easy. Bye-bye.
Bye.